But anyway, Shifali, now let's move on to the question that I had for you, which is for so many years. But I'm not talking only about sports, right? We've seen a shift in of late in the past 5 to 10 years where women have come out, exposed the stuff that's happened to them, the unfortunate stuff that's happened to them uh, because of men, and they've obviously, they've started movements, activist groups, stuff like that. But the fact is that it's taken a while, and people are still, despite there being so many movements, you have the Me Too movement, you have Time's Up, you have all those kinds of movements which have gained so much of public recognition, right? Yet we still see a lot of women still hesitant to speak up, to say what's wrong. Like Theo mentioned, he spoke to Rachel Daly, and she herself, being so close to someone who's been a victim of this abuse, it's not like they're going to cry in front of you and say or do something like that, right? It's always, there's a lot of subtlety involved in all of this. There are things that it's very difficult to notice whether that person has been victimized, has been a victim or not. So I just want to know, and here's where I want your perspective as a woman. Why is it that there's so much of hesitancy to speak about this as a woman, and as well as now as a woman footballer?
Okay, so I'll start with this case in particular. Something I found very significant was when Shim mentioned that, she felt comfortable to speak out again after she saw the formation of Angel City FC, right? I think that's so important to know that, like, there are women in your space. I think just having that, I think that's that would translate to almost every aspect of life. When you're walking alone on the street, you see a woman near you, you're like, okay, there is somebody of my kind. It's always to know that. And so to see that come into play here, I think it's very relevant to have visibility of your own, and that develops a safe space. But now, coming back to the issue of why you can't speak up, I think we've seen that though, right? We've seen right after the Me Too movement, you've seen backlash as to how one athlete was wrongly accused, and then it's just all over the internet that, this is what happens with the Me Too movement, and that's why it's so wrong and it's so generalized. And it's so easy to quickly just, repent a false allegation, as opposed to something that has been happening for years to women all across portfolios. And I think that's kind of why they haven't been able to speak up. Again, in this case, they did try and so just knowing that, you don't have support, and again, mentioning that, there was no player protection in place, just to have these aspects, it feels as though, we're designed to not be able to speak up. And that's what sets people off. I think eventually, with support, without support, there will come a time where you bottle it up for only so much time, and then you get to speak up. But again, that's a very privileged point of view, to think that I can speak up. I think it's very easy for me to say when I've had only like a few incidents that I may not worry too much about. But for people who've had it over a while, say a whole season for that matter, it's not something that you can easily bring up. You have so many questions referencing to a TV show now. But yeah, so I was watching The Good Wife, and in that there was one girl who came up, with an allegation against a very, fictional, but political entity. And throughout the episode, it was shown that the lawyers were questioning her, because they want to poke holes in her entire testimony to be sure that we can take up this case, and that she won't be shredded in the court. But towards the end of the episode, she left. She said, I'm tired, because I came here with my story, and you've tried to constantly poke holes, and I understand why you're doing that, but I can't do it again and again.
Yes.
So to think that way, I think it's so courageous to come up. So after that, you've made that one step, and you think that this is it, I've set my mind to it. But it's not always easy. And then say you make one slip up, it's like it's all over, right? It's like, oh, but she said this, but now she's saying that, so do we trust her? All of these things, I think, make it really hard for women to come speak up. And I'm not saying that it's going to be like difficult always. I really hope not. And I'm not also, dismissing that there are false allegations. I'm sure there are, but that doesn't mean that you completely set it up in a way where women cannot speak up ever. So yeah, I think that's what led to this.
Yeah, and yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, well said, Shefali. I was just going to add to that. Alex Morgan, World Cup winner, one of the biggest faces in American soccer. She wins the World Cup in 2015, right around the time that she gets involved to try and protect and support Mana Shim. I don't think it's a coincidence that it took a player with that much power, that much notoriety to put her name to this story, to the point where she has enough power. Again, we talk about the structures of power, US soccer, etc. When Alex Morgan, has ascended that, she can now kind of navigate and give these women more power and more voice. And like you said, the Angel City aspect of that article is a point to that. When you see women in these spaces, it creates a better environment.
And yeah, I think the other thing I wanted to talk about, Shefali, is like you see a lot of people when they hear just like, if for example they read one article or they hear one story and they say, why don't she man up? Like that's the common phrase, man up. Why didn't she just take it and like, why didn't she speak at that point of time? Why did she just keep quiet? People are like sort of frustrated. I think the fact is that the longer you keep quiet, the more guilty it seems that you are, like, according to people. I'm saying, like, if you don't speak up, you're kind of in part responsible for enabling such behavior. And I guess that also adds to the whatever you mentioned, right? Like the fact that if I speak now, like you mentioned, it's going to take a hell lot of time and people won't even listen to me.
Yeah.
First of all, also like Theo mentioned, if it's a player that's not gained international recognition or status, that like if you are in the lower leagues and you speak up, okay, how many people are actually going to listen to you? Whereas if like an Alex Morgan speaks up, then you get coverage from BBC and the CNNs and all these people. So that obviously is the first sort of hesitancy. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, you can speak. You don't need to put the hands up. It's not class.
Yeah,
sure,
and I also feel as though I'm going to I'm going to get a little controversial here, but with the Ronaldo case, right? I think it's so funny that you mention how when people of stature come in and they discuss it, because if you read any article related to the Ronaldo rape case, it's always a school teacher turned model has accused multi-millionaire star football player Ronaldo, and it's like the news channel does not want to acknowledge that such a thing could happen. They want to reduce people to characters and just make it seem like think about it, she's a model, do you really want to trust her testimony? And it's funny, right? So even in this case, when players of at a lower level, let's say, not national players, etc., just for them to come up to the league, just the league, not even to the people, to come up to the league and mention this is already so it's risky. And then having seen that I think one player got transferred and the other player I think she went to a different league. Am I correct? She went to a different league entirely.
In this story.
Yes.
Sinead, I think she actually ends up retiring. She gets in a car accident or something.
But I think she did speak to the league again, mentioning how she was transferred to another. So these things, I mean, it's constantly like you're worried. What are the consequences? So to see such active consequences has to be a deterrent to speak, right?
Right. And Theo, I just want to talk, because Shefali mentioned a key point here, and since you are in the journalism sphere, I mean, the media plays a huge role in the way they put out stories, the way they write. We've seen it in the Black Lives movement, where Sterling, when he buys a house for his mom, it's like, oh my god, he spent so much. But if it's Phil Foden, it's like he's the darling of the country. So the way the media portrays these players, or as we call them, characters in the story, it's a huge thing, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, the Cristiano Ronaldo thing, not to get totally sidetracked, is a big part of that. And Shafali spoke, very clearly on that about the way you portray these people. And obviously, Ronaldo's huge fan base is going to create an environment at which you're going to get roared out of the room before you can have a very level story. I think, yes, the characterization is really important, but again, it's why journalists like Meg Linehan are so important, and this story was really well handled and really well written. I think what I would say to that is that and tying it in with Black Lives Matter, is that the stories, Mana Shim is a Hawaiian American, so not necessarily a white woman, but Sinead Farrelly, Alex Morgan, the people who are being more heard are more white women, and there are going to be stories from people who maybe are less wanting to be written about in the media or given the microphone, let's say, less, and because they're not white women, they don't fit the profile of what the US wants or is promoted as a women's soccer player who could be abused. So I think we've got to think about that as well, is that it's not so much how is the media portraying Mana Shim or Alex Morgan or Sinead Farrelly. It's Kai McCullough, who was talking about abuse allegations, a young black player. She was talking about abuse allegations last year. Richie Burke, like we were talking about earlier, gets relieved because of health concerns. It then comes out that he was abusing. Kai McCullough goes and talks to the Washington Post. It took her a long time, longer to some extent than Sinead and Mana, who got to talk to The Athletic, for people to believe her story and put her on that pedestal. And how many other maybe black players, non-white players, are in that situation. So I'd say the media's responsibility is to look at the people who maybe wouldn't be believed or not get as much time, and make sure you're putting them in the conversation and putting them in a part of the story. I don't think we have seen, in my opinion, necessarily the media portraying, or at least not in the media that I've seen, portraying these women in ways that are suggesting falsehoods or suggesting that they were somehow culpable. Although, like Shafali said, I think you do see that in other stories. But I think in this case we haven't really seen that from the media. But I do think it's important to look at the places the media isn't looking, or people forget. And I think that race does play a part in that, or gender as well. There's going to be players or body shapes. There's going to be players that look less traditionally feminine or don't identify as female who might be being abused, but people don't. It doesn't fit their narrative. So I think the media has a lot of responsibility for sure.
And Shafali, the last point on this that I want to discuss before we move on to the final subtopic is, we've seen people like Megan Rapinoe and Alex Morgan all speak up, and so people like them who've so they've obviously, before this, they came out and were very vocal about the equal pay agenda and the gender wage, the gender gap, and all of that. Right? They've been very vocal about all of that. When they did that, a huge section of men, or actually just let's say all men, were like, what is she talking about? She doesn't know. They were dismissing her. They were dismissive of her. They said that, it's all your agenda. You don't know what you're talking about. Go wash the dishes, all of that crap, right? For them to come out again and talk about this, again, it's a huge hurdle, right? Because they have to again face the same naysayers or these same people who have already dismissed them as useless. So how much of a hurdle is that as well? The fact that even huge stars like Alex Morgan and Megan Rapinoe, who are internationally well known, but because they sort of have a bad rep. They might probably have a bad rap out there. I have no clue. Never listened to their songs, but have a bad rep amongst men and because a huge society. So how much of a hurdle is that as well?
Yeah. One thing I do want to mention is that I'm also glad that you mentioned how they're dismissed by people saying you don't know what you're talking about. The first comment that I always see on these posts is, "Who is this even?" And I'm just like, get over yourself. You do know now at this point. I mean, everybody knows. But coming back to the topic, right? I think of course it is a hurdle. It has to be. It's at such a big scale, and for them to, especially Alex Morgan, right? She almost pioneered this whole situation to come about and for her to get the player protection in place with other players involved. So what I do respect though is that they continued this, right? I think it's not this isolated incident that they wanted to protest for, say, with the gender gap, etc. I really do appreciate, and it's not something that I mean, it's come to a point where you talk about. So suppose you talk, so in India, what happened was when people spoke out about the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people started questioning, like you spoke up about that, and then why aren't you talking about the Dalit lives, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, why not speak? Like, if you've got to cover one thing, you've got to cover everything. Otherwise,
Everything
you kind
in
of
that domain.
yeah.
I mean, so I think that's kind of what happened to Indian celebrities here. The pressure of being politically active at all times, and I think that while obviously it is important for them to use their influence, I think it can get quite tiresome, to be honest. And it's not very fair to expect that of all people at all times. So I think here in this case, to expect that from them was not something that I wanted to do, but for them to do that, I was really pleased, definitely. And it has an impact, right? I mean, even in this case, for that matter, Paul Riley staying away from the national team players because he knew what kind of influence they had, kind of goes to show where they can bring in their influence, and then to see that reflect in them coming up and talking about it so actively, it brings a lot of light to the entire story, which I'm sure the players are really appreciating. So yeah, I think it's very, very essential.
Perfect. Okay, let's move on to the last subtopic.